I'm fine. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's 4:02. We'll call this meeting of the Civilian Appeal Board to order on today, May 18th, 2022. Ms. Claudia, will you please take the roll call?
Russell Olmsted,
Here.
Michelle Williams,
Present.
Sophia Brewer,
Here.
Brianna Trudell,
Here.
Reginald Howard,
Here.
Brendan Arnold.
Here.
That's it.
Thank you. So we will note that neither the listed chair nor vice chair are present in today's meeting. So for the purpose of today's meeting, I'm going to chair in their absence. The listed chair is, his term has expired. And we, if he's watching, would like to thank him for his many years of service to the Civilian Appeals Board. Mr. Hugh Martin Robinson was an amazing asset and went through several transitions with the board. If it's all right, let's give him a round of applause for his service. I know he's not here today, but thank you for your service, sir. And Mr. Wise, his term is also expired, and he's expressed that he is not, given his work responsibilities, is not going to be signing up for an additional term, but we also thank you for your service to the board. At this time, the next thing on the agenda is approval of the February 16th meeting minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All opposed? It carries. Okay, that brings us to our board introductions. We're excited to have new members appointed to the Civilian Appeals Board. So we will allow Mr. Howard and Mr. Arnold to introduce themselves and share a little bit about yourself. We'll go from there.
My name is Brendan Arnold. I am a law clerk over at Rhodes McKee. We're a boutique firm, mid-size, off of the river there. Graduated from MSU College of Law 2020, May of 2020, and just moved to Grand Rapids about 2 years ago, so looking for ways to get back to my community, and I'm happy to be participating in and taking part in these proceedings and to serve our community in this way.
Hi, my name is Reginald Howard, U.S. Navy veteran. Love being back in Grand Rapids, born and raised here. I work for the Healthcare for Homeless Veteran Office. I help our homeless veterans find housing and help them sustain it. Just recently opened a veteran drop-in center. Right now we're meeting at Marge's Donuts where veterans can come and feel at home. And I'm very honored to be a part of this board. Love giving back to my community. Love being, love being a face of helping solve, being a solution and not the problem. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think it makes sense for us to introduce the remaining board members. So we'll start with Ms. Brewer and work our way down.
My name is Sophia Brewer, and I've been on CAB since 2020, and I am currently employed with the Grand Rapids Community College, but I also serve on the board of the Grand Rapids Public Library as well.
Good evening. Welcome to the team. I'm Michelle Williams. I am the manager of the Special Populations Unit for the Michigan Department of Education, and I serve as a commissioner on the Justice for All Task Force.
My name is Brianna Trudell. I have been on this board since the summer of 2020. I also serve on the Granville Avenue Arts and Humanities Board and the Fulton Street Farmers Market Board. I'm an advocate for our community and just want to see it be the best place it can be and thrive.
My name is Russell Olmsted. Pleasure meeting you both, and welcome to the board. I've been here for, I believe that this is the start of my third term here on the board, but it gets hazy on how everything, because COVID, it's like lost years. But I am a board member of Equity PAC, and I also own a small business here in Grand Rapids, building and repairing guitars at North Coast Guitar Company. So that's it.
Welcome to the board. I'm Phil Strom. I'm the Deputy City Attorney for the City of Grand Rapids. I live over in the 3rd Ward and am a proud resident of the City of Grand Rapids. This board is one of the most interesting and involved boards that I get the pleasure of advising, and really appreciate your service and look forward to the good work that you'll do.
I'm Claudette Henry. I'm OPA Executive Assistant and also the Board Secretary.
And good afternoon, I'm Brandon Davis. I'm the Director of Oversight and Public Accountability for the city, and also serve as the liaison to this board. So welcome, we're excited to have you all. The next thing on our list is another welcome, more introductions. There's lots of new faces around the city, and we're fortunate to have our police chief here and members of the police department, specifically of the internal affairs staff. So this time we'll allow Chief Wistrom to have some remarks and also introductions. He can introduce his team.
Good afternoon. Mr. Howard, I've met you before. Mr. Arnold, we're new. I'm new too. I've been here since March 7th. So it's nice to meet those of you I haven't met yet. I did over 20 years in the Chicago Police Department in a variety of roles there, including working with our internal affairs unit there, our civilian oversight, what we call the police board, which would be your counterparts there, as well as the civilian office of police accountability, which is Brandon's counterparts in Chicago. So I have a lot of experience. I am a licensed attorney in Illinois, and was a supervising attorney in legal affairs in the Chicago Police Department for years before I took over as head of policy there. So what else about me? And it's been a interesting start to my time here. One thing that has struck me is that a tremendous amount of support internally in the police department, as well as in the city government, as well as in the city. So I'm very optimistic that we can all move forward together in a very positive way, making Grand Rapids a better place, making the police department better. So I look forward to working with you all. Have here some great members of the team. I don't believe Lieutenant Forner has met the board before, so we have a new lieutenant in charge of internal affairs, Lieutenant Jana Forner. If you want to say hi or stand up and wave, you can come introduce yourself if you want. You'll probably be interacting with the board quite a bit.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. My name is Jana Forner, and I've been with the Grand Rapids Police Department for almost 22 years. I became the lieutenant in internal affairs just at the end of January of this year, so this is my first interaction with the board. I've met Brandon, I think, once, but I look forward to meeting all of you and working with the board and in my new role in internal affairs.
Might as well make everybody come up. Second newest in internal affairs, Joe. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My name is Sergeant Joe Daly. I've been with the department since 1999 and joined internal affairs in mid-February of this year. So I'm new, still figuring out the process of things and our interaction with you guys as well as the chief's office. Thanks.
And the old man of internal affairs, Nate, if you could.
Hello. Most of you I've interacted with, had the pleasure to stand in front of. So hi again, and to the new members, welcome. I've Sergeant Nathan Mead. I've been with the department 15, 16 years, in law enforcement over around 30 years. I've been in internal affairs since 2020, August 2020. So I'm pleasure to be here and to work with you guys again. So.
And then critical to both our operations and our accountability system is our training unit. And Lieutenant Dave Saver. You want to introduce yourself too? The head of our training unit for the Grand Rapids Police Department is here.
Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon. Nice to meet you. I've met some of you and worked with some of you before, but like Chief said, I'm Dave Sauer, Lieutenant in charge of the training unit. Took over for now Captain Chad McCursey here late January. So Lieutenant Forner and I both kind of transitioned in our positions relatively recently, but I look forward to answer any questions or meeting with any of you anytime you have any questions or anything. So thank you.
Do you want me to take questions or anything, Brandon? Or
We can, sure. So if I know our board, there's probably some questions for the chief. I will preface it by saying that since our last meeting, there's obviously been the tragic loss of Patrick Lyoya. I know there's lots of questions regarding the investigation surrounding his death. At this time, there's a couple things specifically for this board we should talk about, but in general, the first thing is that neither the chief nor I are able to discuss that case, the investigation regarding it. We can talk about how the investigative process works in general, but we can't talk about the specifics of the case at this time. The investigation is being done outside of the police department in order for there to be that level of transparency and to make sure that there weren't those conflicts of interest. There's a city policy that states that it's done that way, and that's why it's being handled that way. So the case is still with the Michigan State Police right now. The next place it will go is to the prosecutor's office for review, and Prosecutor Becker did release a statement regarding that today. So if there's questions about process in general regarding that, we can tackle those questions, but specific about the incident or policy changes as a result of that, we can't discuss at this time. I can tell you that OPA, along with the police department, will do a thorough review of policy related to any and everything that has been raised regarding this incident, and we'll be able to talk about that in more detail. The other point I would raise is that this board is an appellate body, and because this board is an appellate body, there is the potential that an appeal could come to this board, theoretically, and because of that, the board should be very careful about questions that it asks regarding the investigation or the process at this point. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Hello, Chief.
Hello.
Pleasure to meet you, Russell Olmsted. Quick question from me about internal affairs in general. I'm wondering if this is the first time in my experience on the board where we've had 3 members from internal affairs here, which I'm wondering, has there been a change to adding more officers into internal affairs, 1, and 2, if there has been any other changes as far as how officers will serve in internal affairs. Before, I know it's been rotating, I believe on 2-year, I could be wrong on that, 2 or 3 year stints inside of IA, and I'm wondering if that is at all changing or being looked at or anything like that. So thank you.
Well, I'll say that everything's always being looked at, and I am new. It's been a couple months, so I was not aware of like a rotating system. I think Nate's been here over 2 years. It's tough sometimes in units in the police department where you have this different pull. You don't want to lose the institutional knowledge. You want to give, though, your personnel a chance to do something different, and you want fresh ideas in there. So that's something that I would be open to looking at. However, and you notice that there's 3 people now. Previously, there have been 2. I will say that I was sort of surprised following the onboarding process. I thought that, Grand Rapids is very interesting. There's a lot of media attention on any sort of incident, kind of like a lower level incident that wouldn't get attention in my previous agency. It's a big deal, and because of that, during the process, a lot of the questions from the community I heard kind of implied that there was a tremendous amount of civilian complaints and just this tremendous amount of work. Happily, as I've been conducting my review of the agency, I found that that's not the case, and so the increase is not because of the volume, which I think last year there might have been 130 total complaints, and that includes internal complaints. It is because that we have added more responsibilities to the internal affairs unit, and to make them more of, in fact, we may change the name to professional accountability or something like that, because what we have done is we've tasked them with our accreditation system as well. We're CALIA certified currently, which is a national commission for accreditation on law enforcement associations, I think it stands for, the acronym. And it goes to the professionalism of an organization to receive that accreditation, and expect that the internal affairs unit has got to be at the pinnacle of professionalism in our organization. So to see those two things go hand in hand makes sense for me, and that's why we've increased it to 3 and given them that extra task. But great question.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I'm a little bit still forming my thoughts. One of the concerns I have is whether or not our community feels that they have confidence and trust in filing complaints with the police department. And so I'm wondering what strategies and vision you have for building that community trust so that the complaints that you do receive are representative of what the concerns are within the community, and then how will you look to improve de-escalation? Because I think that seems to be something that I've heard a lot in our communities.
Great question. So first question is really interesting, because when I came here, and I've been meeting with the community on a regular, at least once a week, but I haven't turned down a community invitation yet. So I've heard a lot from the community, and I've actually heard a couple times from community members that, I don't think it's right that I have to walk into the police station to make a complaint about a police officer. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was the case, but you should not have to do that. And then I realized, talking to Mr. Davis and others, like, well, that's not the case. But so what I see is we're not doing a really good job advertising that that's not the case, that you can go, you don't have to talk to me at all. You can go see Mr. Davis. You can make a report online. You can do things. So we had this in, I was one of the core negotiators for the consent decree that the city of Chicago is under, with a lot of accountability issues. And we just agreed to, we're going to go all out. We had like this fantastic ad campaign. You can drive down Michigan Avenue in Chicago and literally see Chicago Transit Authority bus stops where it's, want to file a complaint on a police officer? Call 311, do this, or go to this website, or whatever. It's like, make it as easy as possible, because we are not afraid to get these complaints. We want to hear what the community is thinking. So kicking around ideas with Mr. Davis to see how better we can really advertise, market the system, make it easier. It is nice to know that you can go online and do it. Not everyone has access to a computer. It's necessary to be able to do it over the phone. I understand that, we'll send a police supervisor out to take calls as well, but I understand sometimes people don't want to see somebody in uniform. They want to talk to a civilian. So having OPA for us in this city is helpful in that way too. Second thing you talked about was de-escalation. That's extremely important to me. I could really talk about hours about de-escalation, but I won't bore you to death. But it's something, Mr. Davis's budget is increasing next year, hopefully, assuming that the budget passes, with that he's actually going to get a large amount of money to not recommend, but to train our officers with ideas that he has. And a lot of ideas that he has are going to be from the community and even community involved. So we did it before in my previous agency, where we would actually invite community members who would say, like, what I want the police to know is X, Y, Z. And, I don't think you're telling it. And we would just say, do you want to come tell the police officers that? And actually invite the community to co-teach or to teach, or to create 15-minute videos to play at roll call every day. So the opportunities are there. We want to hear the community. Essentially, we work for the city of Grand Rapids, and the city of Grand Rapids is entitled to train our police officers in what's important to the city of Grand Rapids. That's just how it is. De-escalation is something that's very important to me. I know that there is de-escalation training included in the curriculum as it is now, but I don't think it's enough. I actually have just asked my own team to get approval for money. I know it's a strange time now because it's budget, so I'd like to do it right now. But there's classes out there that I think would be some of the best instruction in the country. I'd love to get in here as soon as possible. So there will be enhanced de-escalation training. I'm excited about it. It's just a matter of how soon we can get it done. Yeah.
If I may, I will say that thank you for your response, Chief. And the Chief did talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that the city manager made in increasing OPA's budget. One of the spaces includes engagement. So as this board knows, capacity has been an issue for OPA. And one of the spaces will allow us, it will set aside funding for us to do more engagement, which will allow us to do a better job at some of the things that the chief was talking about, like advertising the fact that OPA exists and that those opportunities are available. We also intend, assuming that the budget passes, intend to have staff that is devoted to that engagement to make sure those education campaigns are happening. I'll add one more point, and I've been saying this multiple places, but it continues to prove itself to be true at this point. So I think it's important that this board knows that I have no difficulty in stating my opinion, and I have previously regarding issues with obtaining information or difficulty working with the police department on different situations. I want to make it very clear to this board that since Chief Wistrom has been here, he has been extremely open with OPA. He has welcomed ideas, welcomed opportunity to look at ways to change, and I truly believe it's intending to create an environment where not only OPA and the police department can work together well to accomplish the goals of the city and seek justice, but also where community can have that trust in the police department. I have seen that up to this point, and I look forward to continued work with the chief. But my experience up to this point has been very positive, and I think the board should know that, because if it wasn't true, I would tell the board that, so I want the board to be aware of that as well. Are there any other questions? Sure.
To the extent that you can you, I guess, walk me through, with me being one of the newer members here, what that first level review process looks like when your office receives a complaint from a civilian?
When do you guys want to be more specific? I could talk generally, but I might as well have an expert who actually does it explain it, Mr. Arnold.
All right, so we'll receive a complaint from a number of sources as discussed. So phone calls, emails, anonymous, we'll get them from OPA, we'll get them from city attorney's office. Pretty much anywhere in the city you can file a report or a complaint against an officer. We'll receive the information, we'll review the information. Our goal is to figure out whether or not there's enough information to qualify as a complaint of misconduct of an employee, and whether that, if true, would result in disciplinary action against an employee. Our responsibility in internal affairs is employee-based discipline and correction, so coaching up to obviously termination. So once we get that information, we'll review it. We'll look at whether or not there's enough information to move forward. We'll contact usually the complainant. If it's an email, usually it's a phone call, so we'll call them back. We'll have an interview with them. We'll get some clarifying information from them. At that point, then we will document what their complaint is, and then obviously go through the whole process of interviews, video reviews, whether it's body-worn camera, vehicle, surveillance video we'll obtain. We'll do interviews with any witnesses. We'll also look at the police reports, any other associated documents. If the person has some sort of documentation, some sort of video, we'll ask for that. Sometimes we'll ask for medical records if there's an injury. So we'll go through pretty much the whole process of an investigation, similar to a criminal investigation, really. Once we get all that information, we'll go through a documentation process, which we have our own forms that are separate from a normal police report form. It's an internal affairs form. We'll document everything that we review, that we see. We'll come to the end, which is our summary portion, which will summarize all the information together. And then at that point, we will put whatever recommendation there is for disciplinary action based on either past practice or sometimes a review with the chief prior to say, hey, this is something that we haven't experienced in a long time, or what are your thoughts? At that point, once we come to that the end process, every 2 weeks we have a meeting with the chief, labor relations, city attorney's office, and we sit down in a room. We present our case to that board. They review it with us, and then we come to the chief comes to a final conclusion to what he wants as discipline or whatever. So that's in a nutshell the process.
At any point, once you reach a final determination, is that determination at all conveyed to the complainant, or is that just something that is internal?
No, so with class 1s and 2s complaints, we have a 3-class system. Actually, technically a 5-class system, but 3 classifications for complaints. The other 2 are, one's an internal document of review, the other one's a department complaint where somebody makes a complaint that, hey, we don't like the fact that there's 5 police officers on this traffic stop. That is a complaint against a process, not an officer specific, so that goes into a department complaint category. Once that class 1 and 2 or class 2s are major offenses, are diligence, are insubordination, missing court, traffic accidents, those type of things. Our class 1s are any bias-based policing, any falsification, so something that would come in front of this board, 800-2 outlines, use of force. I'm missing one. What am I missing? Bias, use of force, falsification.
Constitutional?
Yes, constitutional. So something like that would come in front of 800-2, would come in front of this board. Those are class 1 classifications. Those 2 classifications, 1 and 2, we send our redacted copy of our investigation goes to the complainant. So whatever means that they want communicated, either it's email, mail, we will send that to them. They will get a copy they can have. Class 3s is a phone call, because those are minor disciplinary actions, something that a supervisor could handle right on the spot. Usually gets to us because it's wrapped in with another complaint. So those ones we will call the complainant back and explain to them what our finding is.
If I may, we will have an extensive training where we'll go through all of these things in more detail. So we'll make sure that you all are completely up to date on internal affairs procedures, on the policies that we see come before the board most often, and also how those things are reported. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry. I have one more that kind of sparked my mind while you guys were talking about the engagement with the public about the process. I'm curious, especially right now being budget time, where is the budget allotment and responsibility for that engagement? Does it rest with OPA, or does it rest with the GRPD for informing and engaging the public on the process?
The process, the process in terms of complaints in general, is that what you're saying?
Complaints in general, yes. Yeah, how a member of the public can voice a complaint or file a complaint.
That's shared responsibility. So OPA has some responsibility for that, as our charge is to do a lot of that work. But Internal Affairs also has responsibility, or the chief also has responsibility in that space. Some money was specifically put in our budget for engagement efforts. And that's not solely this type of engagement, but engagement in general. So obviously we're going to use those funds to do some engagement. But that I would say, and Chief, I don't know if you agree, but that's shared responsibility between the police department and OPA to make sure community understands the process.
Yeah, it is, and we make sure it's real easy, on our website, but like I said, not everybody's going on the website. And we've got stacks of pamphlets that we hand out, so, but we can do better.
That's where I think I agree with the chief's remarks about having some sort of process or some sort of intelligent conversation about how to do this work in a good way, because the city has a department of equity and engagement. The city attorney's office does community engagement occasionally, and as a city, it's the city's responsibility to do better information sharing and engagement on how the CAB process works. So making sure we're not giving different messages. Sometimes that can happen when you have too many cooks in the kitchen. But I'm excited to hear about some recommendations on what the experience might have been in Chicago, who the community trusts most to hear that information from, and how to roll that out in a really effective way.
Go ahead.
This is a question kind of in general, and I just want to kind of touch base about some things. So right now, based on what's happening in our community, this board, OPA, the police, all of us are under increased scrutiny. And so I want to kind of go back a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the struggles we had before this scrutiny, some of the concerns of this board, and some of the reasons why some of us feel we're a little bit frustrated prior to going into what's happening now, feeling restrained, feeling like sometimes that this board was a rubber stamp for the city and for the police department, and feeling like we asked for information and information wasn't given. We were kind of going around in circles. And so I have a question for anybody, the chief, Brandon, thinking about this extra scrutiny and hopefully using it as a means of, one, being more transparent, and two, leveraging this attention so that we can get some stuff done. What are you all planning to do to make sure that this board has a voice, that this board is listened to, that this board is not a rubber stamp for internal affairs, a rubber stamp for the police, but we are working in unison? So I just want to hear a little bit about what the plan is, and that may be coming under your re-imaging of CAB and communicating with CAB, but I want to make sure that some of that is addressed.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a fair question. That is what the Reimagining CAB process is about. Because it's asked here, I'll answer it in brief, and we can talk more the other part if there are more questions. In short, probably 6 months ago now, OPA prepared a report and presented it to City Commission based in part on responses from this board, but other boards as well and other individuals in community regarding the Civilian Appeals Board. There's been lots of discussion regarding the Civilian Appeals Board for a long time. One of the positive things about the Civilian, or about Grand Rapids in general, is that the Civilian Appeals Board was created at a time where Grand Rapids was seeking to be innovative. Right? Grand Rapids looked ahead and said we should have a group of civilians who review our internal affairs findings and have the ability to overturn them. At that time, that was not common. That was not something that you saw in most cities. The power that this board has to overturn decisions is also something you still don't see in most cities that have review boards. So it was good that the city was proactive in doing it. However, because the city was proactive in doing it, it was done before a lot of the best practices or things that we now have learned over time happened. So we've been operating based off of City Commission Policy 800-02, which specifically outlines what this board can and cannot do. And some of the restriction that members of this board have expressed concern regarding is based off of the language in the policy. Because it is the language in the policy now, we have to follow the language in the policy now. The Reimagining CAB is a recommendation that was made by OPA in conjunction with other city employees who are part of that. The law department was a part of conversations regarding that, and police department was included in some conversations regarding that. But the idea behind the process is that representatives from different groups, different bodies, and from community, as appointed by city commissioners, will come together to talk about the concerns that have been being raised by this board, some that have been raised by ACLU. The police department has raised concerns, the law department has raised concerns, and OPA has its own concerns regarding the process. So we're bringing all of those things together to have conversation about what are best practices, what changes need to be made to the process in order for this to work in the best way for Grand Rapidians now. So that's what the reimagining process includes. The thing that has to be considered, and I think it's important that we always say, is that there are some aspects of the Civilian Appeals Board that may require collective bargaining. And because of that, that is always a factor that we consider in how we approach making changes to this policy. Ultimately, the policy recommendations will be completed by that task force, if we call it that. It will then come back to City Commission for approval, just like any other City Commission policy. This board will be involved in that. This board will be updated regarding that. there was a representative selected to serve, and he was the then chair. So Hugh Martin Robinson, with his experience on CAP, was selected to represent the Civilian Appeals Board in that place. The mayor commissioners also had the ability to appoint people to serve. So Mr. Reginald was also appointed to serve on the Reimagining Board by the mayor as well. So when we look at all those spaces, there will be voices from the Civilian Appeals Board a part of it, but it's an extensive process. It won't be a overnight, we just are able to do everything we've thought about, but it's going to be very intentional and very deliberate to try to get to that best result, which does consider best practice. But it's happening. The process will happen, and we'll make sure to keep you posted as it moves forward. Go ahead.
If I could just kind of provide some observations on that too. As we look and do research on best practices around civilian oversight for police, one observation that we have currently is there's a lot of different systems that all look different. And I think that's important to note because I've called this board the unicorn board in the past because it's so different than every other board that operates within the city because of all of the complexities around the collective bargaining aspects, the employment law considerations, the complexities around constitutional law enforcement policies, training, police, and all of those things. It's unlike any other board that we have, and that being said, it's unlike most other boards that exist in this space throughout the country. So it can feel frustrating at times to try to find this best practice when everything looks so different when you do kind of that broad analysis of what's working in other cities and is it going to work in Grand Rapids. And I think that sometimes slows down that political process, and it makes it difficult to build consensus around those key elements that need political support from a majority of members, or in the alternative, if the citizens brought together an initiative, getting a large majority of people to agree on those really complex issues can be very challenging. We see it in other areas of city government as well. When we talk about, charter amendments in general, building consensus around what's the best thing for the city to make that huge permanent change for the long term of the city, building consensus around that either with the politicians or with the citizens can be very challenging. So I expect it to be controversial. I expect those conversations to result in some uncomfortable but important conversations. And we plan to be there at the table, and we're willing to do the hard work. But like Brandon said, it's going to take some time because we have to kind of gently walk into it, I think, in order not to disintegrate the opportunity to build consensus and actually get something done at the end of the process.
I'd like to add to that too, Phil, and that is, I am new, and I've talked to all of my officers, and just to give you some comfort, I've made it very clear that I'm going to hold the department to high standards, and I haven't had any resistance. What I've heard is that the officers are happy to be held to high standards. Where it comes to civilian oversight, none of us were around when this board was created, but the research shows that civilian oversight, there's this thing in policing called procedural justice, which modern policing relies on to get their legitimacy. Procedural justice goes both ways. Part of procedural justice is what we call giving others a voice, which is listening. During this process, as we imagine it, I think in order to be seen as legitimate by the police department through this process, you're going to have to get some input from the police department. You're going to have to get some input from the police department. Another tenet of procedural justice, which we use in our day-to-day practice, is neutrality in decision-making. So that means that there cannot be an anti-police tilt to this. Your success as a board cannot be the Grand Rapids Police Department's failure. That's how civilian oversight in this country does not work. The idea is to build trust in the police. You do not have to be a rubber stamp, although I anticipate holding people to such a high degree that there probably won't be that much work, especially with the low amount of complaints that we have. But as I said, the success of civilian oversight can never be in a successful system. Scalps can never be us versus them. Okay, so if this is going to work out, and I'm very confident and optimistic that it will, there has to be listening on both sides. So it can't be the police department is the problem and we're going to fix it. You mentioned collective bargaining. I think that from my conversations with the union, I think they'd be happy to talk about civilian oversight and what this looks like. And even if they don't, their ideas aren't what we end up to be, they need to be heard.
I appreciate that, Chief. And I do want to be conscious of time because I know there were some other commitments today. I'll add that I want this board to understand that the frustration you're expressing is heard and understood, and from my part, respected. And the reason I say that is I think the chief is right in saying that the purpose of civilian oversight, and I say this often, our job is to be neutral as OPA and make decisions based on the law and policy. But if we see inequities, it's also our job to make recommendations, to make changes, to remove those inequities. I know that many people, if we're just transparent, decide to serve in these spaces because they've seen a history of injustice across the nation. And it feels sometimes like fighting the injustice. But I think the chief is right in saying the way we fight the injustice is by holding people accountable to the policy. And when the policy is wrong, making recommendations to change the policy, as opposed to making an attack on one group or the other. But the frustration is felt and the need to fight for that justice, I respect. I think the chief does too, but I respect. And I want you to know that we hear you related to that and want to make the necessary changes so that there can be legitimacy and procedural and actual justice. With that, thank you, Chief. We will, oh, sure. I'm sorry, Brianna.
No, that's okay. I just wanted, I know this, good change takes time. What's your ETA of the policy updates?
Tough question. So, there are still a few appointments outstanding for this group. So I anticipate getting those appointments very soon. And in fact, some have recently come in. So once the appointment process is concluded, I foresee the process taking at least 4 months at the shortest, right? But it could take more time than that, as Deputy City Attorney pointed out. It really depends on how we reach consensus in the process. But our ideal timeline is a 4-month process. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have one other, two other questions. I'll hold one because we're probably going to be talking about this reimagining process further down in this, or no? Is this the opportunity to
I think we've talked about it extensively, so I don't plan to address it. So
okay. So then 2 questions. First of all, for the chief, respecting your time, I just want to clarify about what Brandon started, and I guess for both of you, when we started this discussion about investigation with the ongoing incident with Patrick Leoya. I understand that it's through external investigations and all that. I just want to clarify, because of things that I have read in the media, that there was an internal investigation going on at the same time through IA. Is that not the case at this point? Is it waiting for, and this is just for sake of clarity, is it waiting for the state investigation by the state police to be completed, or has it already started?
The initial investigation has already started. The bulk of the investigation is being conducted by the Michigan State Police, so that we don't have.
All right. Thank you. And the other question that I had, I guess it's more of comments on something else. But in the idea of reimagining CAB and that timeline, we know that there are going to be things within the reimagining of CAB that could very likely depend on collective bargaining. We are in the process, in my understanding, of collectively bargaining the union contracts for the city right now. Due to this timeline, or by the timeline that you've stated, we probably aren't going to get the reimagining process done by the time to actually collectively bargain that at the same, or discuss this while things are being bargained right now on the union contracts. Is that correct?
I don't think that's entirely correct, but I also don't think it'd be appropriate for me to talk about what's happening in collective bargaining.
All right, that's all right. And the only other thing that I would point out that when we were talking to, I really appreciate Chief you taking the time to be here and talking with us and giving us all this information. But the low amount of complaints, I also want to, the relative low amount of complaints that we're talking about for the city, I also want to point out that when we have low trust between community and police and with the process, that can and will affect the amount of complaints that the community feels comfortable bringing in. So I think that we all need to consider that when we're viewing these numbers. I also, as we've talked about, some people don't even understand the process out there because there hasn't been the engagement necessary by the city in order to get that information to them. So I think that we all need to consider that while we're talking about the number of complaints and considering the number of complaints as well. So.
Again, thank you, Chief, and thank you to the department for being here today. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay. The next thing on our agenda is an update from the city clerk's office. So we know there's been questions about terms and how long they last and how the appointment process works. So we wanted to make sure to get those questions answered. So we'll turn it over to Daniel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Daniel Kwame. I work in the city clerk's office. I guess I'm here to answer any questions you have regarding the appointment process. I know the two gentlemen that were just recently appointed don't have to worry too much about this right now. So any questions you might have, or?
Can we start by talking about board terms? So what the terms are for the Civilian Appeals Board, when they officially expire, and how the holdover process works?
Yeah, absolutely. The Civilian Appeals Board is a 2-year term expiring the first Monday in May. So the terms have expired as of the 2nd. However, the bylaws of the board stipulate that board members may serve until a successor is appointed or they are reappointed. We give that little stopgap in case there is some sort of holdup in the vetting process that we do before each reappointment is made.
So some of our board members were appointed halfway through a term. So their appointment was to finish that term. It's not a full 2-year term, is that right?
Correct.
I think that was part of the question.
The terms are static. It wouldn't be 2 years from the date you're appointed. It's a specific date, the first Monday in May, from the 2-year appointment window.
And then, go ahead.
I was just going to point to the bylaws and remind everyone that you're here at your own free will. You know, people can resign and do resign from boards at various times for different reasons. So just because we can hold you over after your term expires doesn't mean that you have to do that. We hope that you stay. You have all provided great benefit to the city through your public service, and we anticipate having more good work and important work as we reimagine CAB. But you are, here on your own free will and able to decline to continue to serve. I don't want you to feel like you're stuck here because we haven't found a successor appointment, if that may be the case. But I sincerely hope that you consider serving and just provide communication to Brandon or to the clerk's office or to our office about what your intentions are. So if you don't intend to serve for another term, we can work on what unfortunately tends to be a lengthy and sometimes arduous process of getting people to serve for the huge pay that you guys all receive.
Right, free parking. So thank you for that, Daniel. So the reappointment process, can you explain how that works and what individuals would need to do if they decide they want to continue to serve?
Absolutely. I have hard copies of the application that everyone has filled out to be eligible to serve on a board. When that's completed, then I will intake that form and then send it to our internal vetting department. That's our income tax department, our treasurer's department, and our Department of Law. We are a Home Rule Cities Act city, so that means that we can't do business or appoint someone to a board if they are in arrears or owe money to the city. So that means any parking tickets, unpaid taxes, that's why we send it to those specific departments. Once I get the confirmation that you are in good standing with all three of those departments, I send Brandon and the appointing authority, in this case it is the commission and the mayor as a whole, and then I await their recommendation on the reappointment or the option not to reappoint members. So that process could take as few as a few weeks or as little as a few weeks, or depending on the severity of monies owing, it could be a month, 2-month process.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
How would we verify that you've received our information other than through the auto response?
Our telephone number's on the website. You're more than happy to reach out. I'm happy to proactively, once I receive the information, send you an email saying this has been received, and I'll forward it on. But the auto response from our website, which is also an option to reapply, would be the indicator that it has successfully reached our office.
Any other questions? Yes.
So then, can you tell us how many applications you've received for this board?
Sure.
And can you be specific and say what ward they're from, or is that too much?
Well, we do have 31 applications for the Civilian Appeals Board at the moment. It looks like a predominant in Ward 1, but also a breakdown of each of the other wards, as well as some folks that unfortunately reside outside of the city, so they're not eligible for this board, but have indicated interest in other boards where residency is not a requirement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that an unusual amount? Is that like more than you normally have? Because I'm just wondering.
For lack of a better word, this is one of the more popular boards that people tend to select as having an interest in. We did receive over 100 applications for the Affordable Housing Fund Board as well. So it's not completely abnormal to have this amount of applications, but for, say, the Electrical Board of Examiners, we don't get quite as many applications.
And that is just the application number, though? It still has to go through the vetting process and then be approved by the commissioners or the mayor to serve?
That's correct.
So, say for instance, the third ward. Say for instance, there's someone who is vetted and they actually can sit on this board. Is there a way for me to stay on the board until someone else is vetted without committing to another term? Based on what you said, it sounds like I can.
That's my understanding of the holdover period, that you can continue to serve at your will until a successor is appointed.
I would say, though, if your intent is only to serve until a successor is appointed, please let us know, because the appointments committee will have to know that in order to vet someone to, try to fill that spot. So I would not expect the appointments committee, they do what they do, but I would not expect them to be looking to fill seats of individuals who are still on the board unless they knew there was a need to do that. Are there any other questions?
Do you need to have those intentions on the record, or can this be a conversation?
Yep, it could just be an email. You could just email us and let us know what your intentions are, and we'll make sure that the clerk's office is aware.
I'm sorry, I do have one other question. For the terms ending the first Monday in May, is that, that's in the bylaws, is that correct? I can't remember. Okay, I wasn't sure, because we had talked about, you had brought up before about trying to stagger the, it seems odd to have everybody's term, not good for institutional knowledge to have everyone's term end on the same day. So that we can make sure to have some sort of a transitioning period, or make sure that there's people to serve. So,
And that is one of the things that was brought up before, and we have it included as part of the reimagining process. Okay, seeing no other questions? Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you all.
Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is the board liaison report. And we've already talked about reimagining CAP, so I will limit it to new member onboarding and training, as well as a communication we received from CAP. So as far as new member onboarding and training, it is important that we make sure that all the members of the Civilian Appeals Board are thoroughly trained on all of the topics that could come up before this board, and this board was a part of a pretty extensive training process last year, and our intent is to do a refresher for all board members, but also to do more in-depth training for new board members. We do not have any pending appeals, so when we don't have pending appeals, generally our plan is to use board meeting time for those trainings. And unless there is a concern about that, we will plan to use a board meeting session for that. We'll work with the city attorney's office to build that out. But it'll likely be next month's meeting. If not, it would be the following month. The other thing is we will also want to make sure that our new board members have the opportunity to go through the training at the police department that the other board members were able to do. So we'll look into some times to get that scheduled as well. That doesn't always work as well with board meeting time. So we will work through that. Yes.
Brandon, I'd just like to request to be advised of the new member training as well, because if possible, I'd like to rejoin just for...
Definitely. Yeah, we'll send out information about it all for everybody. And if you've already gone through that, so the refresher everyone will have to do. But if you've already gone through the other training and you choose to do it again, you may, but you won't be obligated to.
also, as we have a new chief, and I imagine, as we've talked about, like reviewing some of the policies and procedures here inside of the city, as that happens, I think it would be a good idea for us to, when training practices, if they change, that we are notified and then have to go through that training at that time as well.
Definitely, we'll provide updates on training as policies change. And we'll continue the practice of attempting to identify relevant policies related to a particular appeal and including that as part of the appeals packet to make sure that the board has the opportunity to refresh on those things before those as well. Any other questions about training or onboarding? Okay, so you all will receive communication from Ms. Claudia in the coming weeks that will explain what our tentative schedule is related to that, and we'll move forward that way. The other thing is a communication to CAP. Ms. Claudia? Okay, 1 second. Oh, okay. Well, Ms. Claudia's already provided it to me. I'm like, wait, I thought you had this. No, she gave it over here. Thank you. The Civilian Appeals Board did receive a communication from the Reverend Jim Holly from the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners. He serves as the chairperson. The letter expresses, first of all, sends condolences to Mr. Loyola's family and friends of the Grand Rapids community. And it also expresses, and that being the board, expresses their support to the Civilian Appeals Board and willingness to assist in any ways that they can. And that letter is dated April 14th of 2022. Sure, we'll circulate the letter. And that concludes my report. Any questions about my report?
When it comes to communications to the board, obviously not something we get too often, but when that does happen, is this something where it is just sent, given to us at the meetings, or is it something that we can get as board members to review before the meeting?
So essentially we, because this is not something that happens often, we followed the way that it's done with City Commission, which is it's acknowledged during the meeting, and we'll give the board the opportunity to review it. But I would think that's probably the best way to do it is to follow. And City Attorney, you have some?
Yeah, it should be reflected in the minutes. So the minutes should reflect that communication that you'll get for approval next time.
Okay. Any other questions regarding my report? Okay, the next thing on our agenda is officer elections. Given our conversation tonight, I am going to, with the board's permission, request to move that to the next month's agenda, just so we have more clarity around who will or will not be serving. And that'll help us to make a more informed decision. Any objection to that?
Just a question, do we need to have an acting chair in the meantime?
I don't think it hurts to have the acting chair. I think we're okay without it. You know, it's really the board's pleasure.
I'm good without it. I just didn't know if it would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll plan at the next meeting to elect officers. If you all can let us know your intent to serve within the next 2 weeks, if that's possible, that way we can prepare that way. Any other questions?
Weren't we talking about using our next meeting as a training session?
Yeah, we'll still have a meeting though. We'll just be training as the part of it, so we can have that piece of business and then use the remainder of the time for training. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Old business, we have no old business. Any open discussion? Yes.
This will probably be my last meeting since my term has expired. I've got a lot of thinking to do about whether or not I'll serve until I am replaced, but I just wanted it to be on the record that it has been an honor and a privilege to serve alongside you guys. Thank you so much for the work you do, and thank you for continuing to do it. Thank you to OPA and the city's attorney's office for supporting this work. It is very important to our community. And thank you to all the representatives who take time out of their day to come be with us and help us through this process. The training is super important and very confusing if you're not from that land. So thank you for making it simple for people to understand. I think the simpler the better for sure. But yeah, it has been an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other open discussion?
I'm wondering, the report that the board made earlier this year, has that been filed to the city and all of that sort of stuff? I know it was a draft form before, but just want to make sure it's been filed and given to the city and commissioners. And is there any feedback or anything?
There's no feedback to discuss it. It's an annual report. So the annual report was published. So it's published. It's available on the Civilian Appeals Board webpage as well. It was also recently shared, and I'll confirm it was recently shared. At least it should have been recently shared on OPA's social media as well, just so there was more knowledge of it. But it has been published. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to public comment. There is no public, and therefore there is no comment. So with that, we will stand adjourned at 5:05. Thank you all.